Growing up, it was fun to have a creative father. He was a painter, musician, and a visual artist. I remembered filling a huge canvas with brushes of colour and splashing colourful paint everywhere with him. My father was an inspiration, and I wanted to follow his footsteps. As I got older, I was discouraged from following my creative love. So during school, I avoided creative subjects. But deep down, I felt something was missing. This emptiness turned into a black hole, where I was all alone in the darkness. This void was a place where everything around you disappears. I kept hearing over and over, "What's the point? You're not good enough, and nobody cares." No matter what I did, or how many tears I cried, it kept coming back. All I could do during these times was to put on a mask and pretend to be strong. Yet inside, I was shrinking. I wanted it to stop, and it kept repeating. Eventually, I had enough and ripped off the mask to face my fears. One of the ways I was able to cope was through photography. It allowed me to express myself during the depressive years. One of my earlier photos was called Heaven's Freedom. It was taken during winter sunset in my parents' backyard. Looking back, I can see at the point in time, I wanted that freedom to express, to feel, and to be creative, to spread my wings and fly. Photography gave me the power to connect with others and create vibrant images, allowing me to capture the different shades of emotions. It gave me a greater sense of appreciation of the little moments of life, like laughter, strength, and raw essence of who they are in that moment. Over time, I started to make small daily changes through the encouragement of my friends and loved ones. Small things like exercise, meditation, and writing in my journal, focusing on what I can be grateful in those moments. It took courage to take the first step and have faith in myself, and even more strength to pick myself up when I fell. Now I know that the light is always from within.
When I was young, I didn't think I was much like my mama. Everyone would tell me I was more like my laoba's side of the family. They'd recite a pretty shitty list of paternal inheritance: premature graying, awful eyesight, every daughter shorter than their mum. 云长爸爸，你自长妈妈, they'd say. Look how your Didi has her nose, her teeth, even the ding in his name. He's really Ding Lu's son. I was fine with not being much like my mother back then. She had a temper and would nag and compare and worry and stress and never seemed content. I've now lived half the years she did, and more than half of those years she wasn't there. When I think that she only knew me in the first half of my life and in the final quarter of hers, it feels like we hardly knew each other at all. 3 months ago, I received a small box of photos my lolo left behind, taken of my mama before she landed and married and settled in Australia. The woman in those photos wasn't my mama yet. She's posing awkwardly in front of landmarks, laughing with her classmates, going from a teen to a young lady with perpetual smiles before the camera. She looked so happy and goofy and at ease. She seems a bit like me. It was so strange because I never thought that I was like my mama. And I only became myself because she wasn't there to smooth out my rough edges, to question my decisions, or to shape me into something unlike her. I wonder if she'd be as happy as I am, to think of the similarities between us, the ones without the other. The women in the photos, smiling, carefree, at ease.
I'm Anna Nguyen. I'm an Australian-born Vietnamese girl who is not afraid to say what she's thinking and to show people who I really, really am. It's not always that way. I grew up being different. Different to the point where I didn't really have any friends. People would have avoided me. They looked away when they actually saw my face. So it's hard understanding and knowing what I was doing when I was a kid. Years later, I was told I had autism. I didn't know what it was. Didn't really feel that I had a problem. But for me, fitting in was hard. I was told that what I did was not normal. I tried hard to fit in. I tried very hard to join into groups, but then I kept getting rejected. Some kids would have called me retarded and laughed in my face. It made me sad, and often, at times, I cried alone in the dark. It was music that got me out of this. Music made me feel like home. It makes me move. It had everything that I needed to be myself and to express myself. I eventually got into making spoken word. Spoken word is hip hop with no beats and no autotune. It is just simply real voices saying things that are real to me. And it's just honest music. It sounds something like this, so you know. I wish you knew me. I wish you knew. I wish you knew me. I wish you knew the last of me. Me. I wish you knew the last of me. I wish you could completely understand me. I wish you understood me, completely in my heart. I wish you understood me, so then you know. Just learn to understand and not hate. This is an outro for my hit called Not an Okay, and it is dedicated to all people who are feeling alone and different and are going through the same situation as me. Autism is just a label that you can break free. Live your life on your own terms. Be whoever you want to be.
Like mother, like daughter. Isn't that the phrase? Supposedly too independent for our own good. How much of history repeats itself? Do you remember telling the story of how you married Dad? The guy you wrote pen pals to and then moved to Australia with. When you say it's one of the many bold risks you've taken in your life, calling it a fairy tale because you wanted to get out of the barrio, get married and have kids. But what happens after Cinderella's wedding? Is it really the happy ever after we're fed? Do you remember confessing that you didn't know how to cook? You just threw stuff in a pan and hoped for the best. How you made pancit for everyone in my class for Multicultural Day, and I didn't understand how everyone loved your cooking when you didn't love it yourself. Do you remember thinking you gave birth to a monkey when you had me because I was premature and covered in hair? Introduced me to your friends as the only hope, and 4-year-old me internalized that as making it in my career. But really, it meant bearing children myself one day. Do you remember telling me that you only wanted one child, but Dad wanted another, and so my brother was born with Down syndrome. And I wondered what would have happened if you said no, and what sort of karma are we dealing with? Do you remember performing songs in front of the entire grade in high school and their parents? And how I went bright red holding your sheet music and the rest of the Filipinos thought you were drunk, partly because you were off tune, but also because you were brave. But you weren't drunk, just loved singing enough that you wanted to share it with others. Some days, I imagine the fatigue and resentment in your heart. But you take everything into stride. The times I ask you, how do you do it? And all you do is shrug and say, I tell myself I'm strong. Is that the fairy tale you always wanted?
Can you imagine that you are the artist? Because I can. 상상을 초월하는 미래를 상상할 수 있습니까? Can you imagine a future beyond your imagination? The first time I picked up a painting brush was after a long day at work, and I just wanted a chance to stop thinking. So I just went to a social painting class, something totally outside my comfort zone. And there, I picked up a paintbrush, and I looked at all the colors and painted something that I didn't know I had inside of me. It is that one thing that I do in my life that I don't plan, I don't organize, I don't control. I just pick up the paintbrush and become as empty as possible. I get my inspiration from how I feel in that moment, the people I'm with at that moment. It's one place in my life that I can look myself in the eye, the soul's eye, and just express what I truly feel. And I also paint for what I want to manifest. I want to manifest a future full of light and joy and happiness and friends. So when I have the strength, when I feel grounded, and especially when I'm not feeling grounded, I paint what I want my future to look like. I'm an executive leader in the world of corporate, where the world is black and white. To become an effective mindful leader, I realized to be creative and to have joy in finding the potentials of the company and the people I work with was the key. And how I found that was through my art, all its colors, all its shapes, all its spirit. And that came from my inspiration from my mother, how she's enjoying the later years of her life, going back to what she loved the most as a high school student. My mother's dream when she was in high school was to be a professional Korean traditional dancer, wearing the beautiful Korean costumes. And when I see her, I'm so proud of her and so inspired. And I also found inspiration in my grandmother, the creative entrepreneurial, who created beautiful, wonderful traditional Korean gowns, hanbok. What I realized is that the creativity, the DNA of being an artist is inside every one of us. That everyone can be an artist.
Survive, hustle, breathe. Often been so intertwined in the three that I forget or numb the journey it took me to get to this spot here. Perseverance through trauma. Trauma I witness. Trauma I experience. trauma that runs through my blood. When I was 16, the rights to my own body, piece of innocence, can never get back in order to live alive. My fault, my mistake, let's never speak of this again. Shame through my papa and mama's voice. Shame I carried for so long, inner battle inside of me, that half knows the truth and other believes in the falsehood of these words. 18. Hands of witch around my throat, squeezing and echoing. Your dreams, what you are doing in your life, what you want to be, retarded. You are not important. You're not special. Dear brother, did you mean what you said? Or was it your own inner critic peeking through? Now, age 19, almost 2 years living independently on my own, I'm ready to live my dream and find inner peace in myself.
Iris Terry was born in 1927 in Griffith and spent most of her life in Carramar, Western Sydney. Well-liked, life of the party, and very outgoing. Her first job was as a tailor. She got married when she was 28 and she became my best friend when she was 50. Iris like a mother. She's supportive, caring. She always offered advice when needed. We travel quite a bit together. We go to the theatre, bus outings, yearly, legacy. In 2019, she turned 102. It doesn't matter where I take her. As soon as people hear that she's 102, everyone wants to meet her. People don't believe that she's 102. She's much younger, lively. She looks like she's in her 80s. I just think that they think because you get old, you've lost everything. Where if they would only sit and listen, they are a wealth of knowledge. And they can give you that knowledge if you only listen to them and don't think they're just too old to remember. Their mind hasn't gone. Maybe their body's gone, but their mind doesn't go. Iris has taught me to be very tolerant, to care for other people, respect people's feelings, and to do good whenever I can. Iris has so much to give if only people would take the time to sit and listen to her.
For the longest time, I felt like my own imposter. I was 16 when it happened. It was a hot summer day and my friends and I were coming home from school, travelling on a tin can train. Today should have been like any other day, but it wasn't. I had heard an angry voice yell from behind me, "Fucking Asian." Shortly after that, I found an excruciating pain on the nape of my neck. The sharp blow had radiated through my back as I jolted forward. Amongst all my confusion and shock, time stood still. It started to process that I was assaulted, as I caught a glimpse of my attacker's grey curls and daisy print pink dress before she left the train. I thought to myself, that's not what an attacker looks like, why me? As her words echoed in my mind, I thought to myself, I wasn't welcome to be here in this country. Things changed after that. Things that I used to love about my culture started to annoy me, from our food to entertainment to tradition. My mum asking me to translate sentences for her broken English, just anything that reminded me of being Vietnamese annoyed me. It wasn't until one day when I came from school, the familiar smell of gum, distant murmur of my mum's cheesy Viet dramas weren't there. Instead, there was a deafening silence. My mother, the strongest and most resilient person I knew, was in tears. I had only seen him cry over movies, but not like this. It turned out a newcomer at work had mocked her for her jagged English, made her small for simply being herself. Being treated differently should never happen, but that's just the thing. We do live in a world where bad things happen. That's why we have to stand on our 2 feet proudly and state our culture and heritage proudly. To say that we are here, and you cannot tear us down as long as we support and have each other.
Shirzan, that means lioness or female warrior. She had 6 children, widowed in her 30s. She was fearless. She raised 4 independent women, and she taught herself most things about the world, even reading and writing in Farsi during her adult years. I grew up listening to her stories of love, hope, yet she felt as a woman I would have more struggles, because boys had it better. They have power, more freedoms and choices. I was supposed to be a boy. You can imagine my mother's surprise when she found herself holding me on the floor of a military hospital, having just birthed her 2nd daughter. But my mother lived during unpredictable times. I was born 3 years into a war that would go on for another 5. Perhaps it was my gender that forced my parents to migrate to Australia, knowing the freedoms that they wanted for my sister and I was no longer possible in my homeland. Migration caused the initial separation from my Shirzan. It's like Shirzan. On arriving in Australia, she went back to university, worked nights in a nursing home, and yet still managed to volunteer at the school canteen the next day. My mother did her best to fill the void, but I still missed my Shirzan. I was 10 when she came back into my life, her laughter and warm hugs filling my heart with joy. I would run home from school to go on walks with her. On one of our walks, she asked me to dig out a boysenberry tree on the side of the road. She told me that trees are like humans, have feelings and need to be nurtured into a desired path. We need to be in charge of our destiny. Using our 2 hands, we shape the course of our future. Years later, upon her passing, I received one of her bangles. When I wear it, I feel empowered, as if she is standing beside me, holding my hand and encouraging me to push myself. Now in my work, I try to help and empower new migrants and refugees as they resettle in Australia. As for the boysenberry tree, it has bared fruit numerous times, and I often find myself speaking to the tree, and I feel my Shirzan listening. She showed me strength and resilience in her own life, and reminded me of my independence and strength to achieve anything. Shirzan, the lioness, the female warrior, my Aziz, thank you for being my grandmother.
You never fry with sesame oil. My mum's voice barked from the countertop, somewhere between the chopped mushrooms and vermicelli. It was insistent, despite the 10-hour time difference. Growing up, I was certain of only one thing. I was going to move to London. This smoggy, rain-soaked metropolis seemed like a paradise compared to the dry expansiveness of suburban Sydney. I wanted to walk the city streets, packed with people and ablaze with lights that never turned off, feeling like I was at the center of the world. I wanted to never keep up, to be one of the rushing ants that was swallowed by the gaping, steaming maw of big city life. Another Londoner, not the uncoordinated kid eating chicken feet who didn't understand AFL. Not the kid paired with the only other Asian student despite not knowing how to speak Mandarin. I wanted to be a comma, not a question mark. For once. Suffice to say, By the time I arrived in East London when I was 26, I was ready. I had my visa. I had the tube map memorized. I was ready to learn to love beer. What I wasn't ready for was how bad the food was. You know all those jokes people make about how sad British food is? Well, I'm here to tell you, it's all true. Despite the new friends, the glamorous new job, the endless trips to endless galleries and gardens and museums, I could never escape the trail of anemic, tasteless substances. Too hard, too soft, too wet, too dry, all wrong, that had somehow been labelled as food. Until that point, I'd never craved Chinese food. In fact, I'd actively tried to get away from it. Like a taste bud Indiana Jones, always hunting for new flavours and new cuisines. But for the first time in my life, I dreamt of dumplings. Fried, boiled, steamed, juicy pork jewels filled with succulent cabbage, slippery, fragrant chives, and earthy mushrooms. The crispiness of fried dumpling skin, the soft give of boiled and steamed pastry. I spent nights chasing my mother's dumpling recipe, days surrounded by supermarkets filled with sweet chili sauce and microwavable lemon chicken in the Asian food aisle. In vain, I ate Vietnamese, Thai, Indian, but nothing hit the mark. In the end, I had to stop running. On the phone, my mother was still as loud and demanding as ever, but this time I was finally ready to listen. It seems ridiculous to travel halfway across the world to come home, but as I bit into my first dumpling, a deformed, overstuffed, visual monstrosity, my mum yawning as she asked me how they were, I closed my eyes. We could have been in the same room.
In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, my mother arrived in Australia as a boat person, and then in 1988 I was born. Growing up with my mum, we had different personalities, different views, and different values. She's loud, I'm quiet. She's outgoing, I'm reserved. She's daring, I'm cautious. We also looked very different on the outside. Our eyes, our noses, and our skin colour. It wasn't me who just noticed, but others also noticed. The truth is, I don't know who my father is. My mother never spoke about it. It made me wonder on what he looked like and where he is now. Is he anything like me? Is he also quiet? It made me wonder if he even knows that I exist. What if I walked past him on the streets? What if I meet the love of my life, but we're actually blood related? One day I decided to ask. I asked about his name. I asked about how they met. I asked about where he is. I asked about what happened to him. But all I've got back was nothing. Not a word, not one piece of information. Just silence. And I kept asking. I even asked one of my cousins to find out from his mum for any details, and still no response. It's frustrating that I'm going around in circles and getting no new answers, not even a step forward. No one wants me to know the truth. We had a trip together to Vietnam, and the topic came up again. But this time through another auntie. She said, "You look like your dad." But my mum quickly interjected, "Don't say anything." This was the first time she responded. Even though I didn't get any new information, I realized this was my family's best kept secret. My mother, for someone who's talkative, for whatever reason, doesn't want me to know. I know she's doing this to protect me, but I've been through every possible case scenario and I'm at least prepared for the answer. I'm now okay with not knowing, but when I'm ready, I'm here to listen.
My parents fled Iraq in 1991, and I was born in Jordan a year later. We lived there for 7 years in 3 different houses, waiting for a forever home. We spoke Assyrian, but when they didn't want me to understand, they spoke in Arabic. I would listen to them at night, whispering their worry in exaggerated H's, carried by subtle vowels into rolling R's. I first heard about Australia whilst eavesdropping on a conversation my parents had about my aunt. It quickly became one of my favourite things to talk about. I only knew the name. The other details were filled with the 2 Western TV shows being aired in Jordan at the time, The Nanny and Mr. Bean. I would tell everyone about the small yellow cars and outrageously large hairstyles of the nasal-toned Australians. I would sit in front of the mirror for hours, pretending to speak English. Mimicking television news reporters, I would play the heavy G, D, and T sounds and extend my A's and O's. Good morning. Welcome to the show. In 1998, after 3 failed attempts, the United Nations finally acknowledged our refugee status, and we were granted a visa to Australia. I was 6 years old. We arrived in Australia by plane in November of 1998. All I knew was the English alphabet and the numbers 1 through 10. I was placed in the 1st grade. I spent the whole first day crying. I'd never been apart from my parents, and I didn't understand a word anyone was saying. I remember my teacher at the time, Mrs. Bucas, leaning over my table, screaming into my face, "Tea your popcorn!" while I sat crying over my lunchbox. The more I cried, the more she yelled. I had no idea what she wanted or how to make her stop. It was a few months before I finally understood what "eat your popcorn" meant. Another time, I remember getting in trouble for not bringing a cook boy outfit for a school performance. I had no idea what this was until I saw the kids dancing on stage with cowboy hats and whips. When I was 10, we were finally granted citizenship. I was so incredibly thrilled. I proudly wore my gold citizenship pin to school. Not a single person noticed.
I moved to Australia from Botswana with my family when I was 11 years old. I thought it would be just like the shows I watched on TV, just like America. But it wasn't. It was different. Our family moved to a small town called Gunnedah, and the people were friendly to us, but something didn't feel right. They would stare at me at school and want to know more about me. I thought it was a good thing, but it still didn't feel right. Were we the token black family? That couldn't be, because there was one other African family in our town. The only difference was they had lived in Gunnedah for years. We were the shiny new toy. Could they see me beyond my skin color? Could they discover who existed behind the Ugandan skin? I am proud to be from Africa, but I'm also a woman, a friend, a sister, a daughter. I like to write and dance and sing loudly in my living room. I am strong, but I'm also vulnerable. I have an opinion and a point of view. I am more than my skin color.
A child born in southwestern Sydney to Lebanese parents, raised in Muslim household, a father who's a builder, a mother who organizes paperwork and emails for the family business. A child growing up with a disability, trying to keep up and tries to communicate but fails. A child who hates primary for falling behind, getting teased, bullied, and 1 minute has friends, the next of having no friends. Time went on, she became a fighter, motivated, a hustler. No matter the obstacles, she wanted to be smarter and better. Yes, she struggled, but managed to get by. Family being teared apart, but buried inside. Not a word or a sound, but kept a secret. Looking up to her parents as they are fighters. It came to a point as she grew older to hustle to be where she wants to be. It came a point in her life that she fell into depression, stress, anxiety, frustration, pain, and to a point that almost committed harm. Kept it hidden, moves forward. Heart breaks, emotion starts. Creative comes out, stories to tell. People failed to believe in her, as others encouraged her to take the next step in life. I've gone through rough obstacles. What kept me alive is my parents and siblings, the love I have for them. A story to tell, a story to share.
The kid who always had her head stuck in a book was me. I always found stories and facts easier to understand than people. I didn't focus on making friends too much. I was happy reading by myself, which during my school years worked. I studied hard, graduated high school. Yippee! I got into uni, studied hard there as well, and graduated. And after that, well, I was on my own. All my studies didn't prepare me for the challenges of the real world, the fears, anxieties of growing up, becoming independent, and wanting to fit in. I needed help. Instead of books, I needed people for their guidance, laughter, solidarity, and helping them in any way I could also gave me drive and purpose in return. I started talking to my high school friends again, my uni colleagues, and I became less afraid, despite me not having work. It became easier to say who I was and where I wanted to go. One of the more satisfying things I do is listening to other people talk. When they are anxious or shy, I understand, because I was like that too. But I always tell them not to be afraid, because their story is one worth telling.